Recording. Okay, so welcome everyone. Let me just share my screen and see if this works.
News flash hits like a hammer. Domain names got the glamour. 419 consulting in the mix, bringing DNS tricks, top-notch info fix.
This that only partly worked. I'm not sure if you got the sound on that, but hopefully you did.
We did.
Woke everyone up.
Excellent.
Better than coughing.
And the bit it missed was that the call is sponsored by DNSOArc. So thank you to DNSOArc for sponsoring the call. Okay, so just as a reminder, in a second I'll hand over to Marco Davids from SIDN Labs, who's going to talk about the, in my view, really interesting DNS for All project. And then, as always, depending on time available, we'll pick up on some of the surprisingly large number of headlines over the last week or so that were DNS related, discuss a few forthcoming events, future call topics, etc. But I'll manage that according to the available time. So without further ado, so let me stop sharing, press the right button. Welcome Marco to the call. Thank you for coming on to talk about DNS for All, as it says, experimental public resolver. So let me hand over to you and talk us through it, and then we'll see where the discussion leads us. So thanks everyone. Over to you, Marco.
Excellent. Can you all see the slides? I guess so.
Yep.
Yeah, all right, great. Well, good day, everyone. Well, let me first say who I am. My name is Marco Davids, and I work for SIDN Labs, as Andrew already said. And SIDN is the registry for the country code top-level domain of the Netherlands, .nl. And the research department, SIDN Labs, where I work for us, we focus on the core activities of a registry. So we have a strong focus on DNS and DNS security, but we also are interested in keeping domain names as a whole safe. So we have designed web crawlers that visit every .nl website on a regular basis and then collects a lot of information, both technical and marketing-wise. We conduct research into phishing and malware and, well, the usual stuff. And we also have a few colleagues looking a little bit more to the future. So some of my colleagues are now looking at post-quantum encryption algorithms for DNSSEC. They're working on a test bed. Could be an interesting topic for another session of this. But I'm here today to talk with you about one of our smaller, well, perhaps more fun projects, if you like, which is DNS for All. All right, what is DNS for All? It's a public DNS resolver, and important to emphasize, it's an experimental resolver. And we intend it to be feature rich, so all the bells and whistles that we could think of are hopefully enabled in this platform. It's based on our existing Anycast testbed. I'll get back to that later, why we did that. And we strive to be compliant with some of the industry's best common practices, like the KIN-DNS initiative or RIPE's resolver recommendations document 823. I can recommend it. I was part of the task force, and I used some of the information that I collected with DNS for All as feedback for this document and other documents. And also we try to be, of course, privacy compliant, so GDPR compliant. We are not DNS for EU, and we are not a production service. So why did we build this public resolver service? Well, at some point in time, we were discussing and we realized that running a modern DNS resolver with all the features enabled that are available today is pretty difficult. It's hard. It's much harder than it used to be in the old days. And the reason being, of course, is that many features have been added to the DNS, especially privacy features. And some of them are mature and some of them are in their early stages. And it's hard for old-fashioned ISPs, smaller ISPs with a couple of system administrators, if you like, to keep up with these developments. So I'm a client of a pretty large ISP in the Netherlands, but they have nothing of this kind. I don't think they even do DNSSEC, and they certainly don't do DOH and DOT and all the other things. So ISPs are lagging behind. And we were wondering, is that a problem? Because what we saw was a technology gap happening between the big tech companies such as Google with public DNS and Cloudflare and Quad9 and others. They have the ability to deliver modern open DNS resolvers with all the features enabled. And there's a difference between them and my good old ISP who is lagging behind. So you also see a shift of some organizations shifting towards these resolvers. For example, one of the first things that I do when I enter a hotel room, I switch on the Wi-Fi and I check which resolver are they using. And many times it's just Google public DNS. So that's the centralization issue that we were thinking about, whether or not that is an issue or something to worry about or whatever. So we wanted to better understand how hard is it anyways to run a modern resolver, and the best way to find out, of course, is to build one yourself. And we thought if we do that, and if we find a way of doing this, maybe we can come up with some answers. Maybe we can publish sort of a blueprint of like, this is how we did it, perhaps as an inspiration to others. And the name DNS for All, by the way, is just a little wordplay, because at the time we were thinking about this, the European Union issued a call for tender for DNS for EU. But they're not related at all. It's something completely different. And now I must be careful, because sometimes I say DNS for EU while I mean to say DNS for all. So I shoot myself in the foot with that naming joke. Here are some of the features that we enabled on DNS for all. This is an incomplete list. For example, I left out the things that nowadays are enabled on modern resolvers by default. For example, QNAME minimization is enabled by default in Unbound. So I left that out of this list. But still, it's an impressive list. And people like here in this group, we know DNS and we understand these drafts, of course. But an average system administrator at some local ISP might not know half of them, or maybe none of them at all. We try to enable all of these, and I'm not going to highlight all of them, but I would like to mention RFC 9606, res info, because that is a nice example of something that I didn't think of myself, but I was directed, I was pointed to it by Stefan Botsmeyer, and he said, is res info perhaps interesting for you to try and enable on DNS for all? And I said, yeah, why not? It's a test bed, we could try that. And perhaps we are the only ones now who have enabled it, but that's the kind of things that are possible if you're running a playground like DNS for all. You can try these things and see how they work out in practice. Like I said, we built DNS for all on our existing Anycast testbed. This is a testbed consisting of 32 instances, VMs, throughout the world, according to this map. You can go to this URL and click for yourself, because we do some catchment testing as well on this testbed, and I have some slides about that later on. Okay, how did we build it from a technical perspective? First, we started virtual machines with Ubuntu, but nowadays, in the new generation of this test environment, we are using Flatcar Container Linux. That's a derivative of Core OS. Perhaps you've heard of that. And Flatcar OS is basically a very slim Linux environment specifically designed to run Docker or containers. So on top of that is a Docker engine, and then we have everything containerized. And for the sake of this presentation, I've mentioned two more relevant containers, which are DNS dist and bird. And bird we use, of course, for BGP routing, because it's an Anycast testbed. We bring our own autonomous system, our own IP space, and we do the routing with bird. And DNS dist is used as what we like to call a DNS front end. So the queries come in on DNS dist and are then forwarded to what we call a backend, which is unbound in our case. And the convenient thing about this setup is that it is very easy to add new VMs. So all we have to do is click a new VM at some location and then enter this small ignition configuration file that you see below in the slide. And then boot up the system, and it installs Flatcar and then starts running this ignition configuration. And what it basically does is it fetches a larger ignition configuration file from a central location. And that is convenient because it allows us to make modifications in one location, and we can easily spin off as many machines as we like, and they will all fetch that file and start running. And what's in that file is basic stuff like creating new users, creating some files, creating some system control jobs, etc. And ultimately, it downloads a shell script, and that shell script finalizes the configuration of the VM. It's pulling down the Docker images, starting them up, etc., etc. And firing up a new VM like this takes less than a minute. So I don't do a whole lot of updates anymore. If I make changes, I just throw away the VM and create a completely new one, because that's less than a minute and it's much more convenient. And I know I have everything in place where it should be. There are also some monitoring Docker images, but I left them out for the sake of simplicity. So that brings us back to this picture again, except there is something added, which are the orange devices. Those are the backend resolvers. So we have configured DNS dist in such a way that it prefers a resolver nearby. And if that resolver is too busy or it becomes unavailable, there is always it can always go to another resolver. And there are in reality 4 resolvers. One is in Mexico City, one is in Amsterdam, one is in Frankfurt, and the last one is in Singapore. For a testbed, that is enough. If you would do this in production, of course, you would add more resolvers. But the idea is you receive the queries at the front end, the DNS dist system, and then process the DNS queries in backends, which are, in our case, unbound resolvers. Some nitty-gritty details to end with. Like I said, we use virtual machines from Vultr in our case. They are the low-end instances. So we start with the $5 instances, and for some locations that is sufficient. For example, the VM in Honolulu doesn't receive a lot of queries, and we can do with a $5 image. On some locations, we upgraded it, a little bit more CPU, a little bit more memory, but anywhere between $10 to $15 per month per VM is what it costs. So we are below $1,000 every month for this whole setup. The DNS dist instances, they communicate with the unbound resolvers with proxy v2. And the reason why we did that this way is because we want to have the client IP addresses available at the resolver level, so at the unbound resolvers. If we wouldn't do this, we would see the IP addresses of the DNS dist instances. But we want to see the client IP addresses in case we want to do something like combat abuse or block IP addresses or whatever. We didn't do that at the moment so far, but it's there in case we need it. We do the monitoring, of course, with the obvious tools that everyone uses nowadays, which in our case is Prometheus and Grafana. And we focus on collecting statistics about the usage of DOH, DOT, DOQ, and IPv6. We also experimented a little bit with post-quantum algorithms. We have it enabled on DOH and DOT, but we didn't manage to get it working on DOQ. I'm not sure why at the moment. I should look into that. But one possible explanation could be that DNS dist is compiled with another SSL library, like Quiche, for example, and not OpenSSL that we used for enabling PQC, but I'm not sure. And if anyone has feedback, I'm interested in hearing that. We also configured a strict rate limiting on this setup, just to be on the safe side. We didn't know what to expect when we enabled this, whether or not we would be abused for DNS amplification attacks, etc. So the rate limiting is pretty strict. I wouldn't recommend it to be this strict in production, but for testing it works. And we do all the stuff that others do as well, like, for example, we block any queries, etc. And one other thing that we have added is whenever a query comes in for an annex domain, we build in a 1-second delay. So that is to frustrate people who will use us for dictionary attacks, etc. And those are the funny things that you can do with DNS dist. So we're very happy with that, with DNS dist in between. Here are some of the statistics. On the upper row, you see the unbound statistics, and then below that is the DNS dist statistics. And if you look closely, you can see that there are more queries coming in at the DNS dist level than are being forwarded to unbound. And that's because we have enabled a small cache in the DNS dist instances. And the circle graph on the lower left shows that indeed about 25%, 27% maybe, of the queries are being answered from the caches in DNS dist and not being forwarded to unbound. You can also see that we receive most queries from the European region. If we look a little bit closer to the European region, you can see the blue line, which is Charles de Gaulle. That's the airport code that we use for our VM locations, which is the node in Paris. And that's kind of interesting because our testbed was never supposed to receive any traffic. We didn't know what to expect, but certainly wasn't supposed to be used by many people. But at some point, we were at like dozen queries, like 20, 30, 40 queries per second. We were using it for ourselves and maybe a few others. But then the data rate increased to 300, 350 queries per second. And it was all coming from Paris, from France. And we were wondering what the reason was. And it turned out that there was this lawsuit with OpenDNS in France, and they lost it. And OpenDNS was so annoyed by it that they terminated their servers in France. And that was the moment when we saw an increase on queries to us. If you look at the DOH graph, the middle one, well, it's mostly DNS over UDP still. I'll have a slide on that as well later because I have questions about that. And then it's mostly IPv4, which is predictable but sad in a way. A little sidestep, this is more related to our Anycast testbed than it is related to DNS for all. But we use that testbed to study BGP catchments. And this is one example where you look at the catchment of our Singapore node, and the heat map shows that most traffic to Singapore is coming in from that region. A little bit from India, something from Japan, Indonesia. This makes a lot of sense. Another example is the node in Chile, Santiago. Makes also sense. A lot of traffic from Chile and some surrounding countries. So this is good. And here is an example that surprises us. Shouldn't be this way because this is the node in South Africa, Johannesburg, and you see traffic coming in from France. And this is a situation where I would trigger on because I would then dive into this and see why we receive traffic from France in South Africa, where we have a lot of presence in Europe. And this is where we start studying the data and also start trying to improve it by doing some BGP tuning and tweaking, for example, to play with BGP communities or AS path lengths and things like that. And the things we learn with this testbed is knowledge that we bring back to our production environment for .nl, so for the authoritative name servers. And at the moment, we are building a dedicated system called AutoCast that does it even better, but this is how we started doing these catchment measurements. All right, so that is in a nutshell DNS for all. Well, some observations. What we designed works. We were inspired by Quad9 because I believe they do similar things with DNS dist and a backend resolver. I don't know about the other ones. It's a lot of fun, and we learned quite a few things. And there are some things that I would like to highlight that we have learned because they are from a personal experience, and I would like to address it here in this group and see what you think of it. One of them is this ResInfo draft that I mentioned earlier, or RFC actually, RFC 9606. We implemented it on request, and initially we did it wrong. So the picture on the right is from a mailing list, the OpenBSD mailing list, because apparently some people already started testing it. So they noticed that we had this enabled on our resolver. And they said, oh, it seems that as if they are doing it wrong. And that's true. We were indeed doing it wrong. And what I'm trying to say with this is that sometimes it's very hard to understand the RFC. You really have to read it closely to see it's ambiguous. In fact, this RFC now has an errata that focuses on this particular issue with how to represent this ResInfo record in the DNS. And I think that is good news that we were able to do it in DNS for all. Another thing that keeps me puzzling is the amount of HTTPS queries, the HTTPS record type queries that come in. There's quite a lot of them. Apparently, Apple supports this on their iOS and other devices. But I'm not sure how it is used on websites. I know Cloudflare enables it for their customers, whether they like it or not, which is good, I think. But for example, the other day in our office, we made a change on the A and Quad A records, but we forgot to update the IPv4 and IPv6 hints on the HTTPS record. And I'm not sure if something will break then. It's something that I have to read the RFC very closely again. Maybe it's there, but for now it's a question to me. And this is also something that puzzles me, and that is the DDR. Does it work or not? For us, it does not seem to work. So this is the designated discovery of designated resolvers, RFC. So we added all the records in the DNS, and we still don't see anything happening. I know Apple supports it, but when I use DNS for all in my etcresolve.conf, I don't see a switch to DOH or something. I don't see it happening in my browser either when I configure it in my Chrome browser. I even built an entire web page, which is info.dnsforall.eu, and it shows you how you did the DNS queries, so whether or not you did it through DOT or DOH, and it never seems to make the automatic switch, even though we have all the SVCB records in place. I'm not sure why it happens. Do we need an IP address in the SUN of the certificate of the DOH and DOT servers? I don't know. I do know that it is hard to get an IP address in the SUN. Not every CA supports it, or they don't support it for IPv6, for example, and only for IPv4. So if it's needed to get this thing working, then we should maybe switch from CA. And I was wondering, is that the reason why the DOH usage is low? Because there is no automatic switch for DNS for all to based on this protocol. So, in summary, what's next? Well, it's a fun project for us. It has benefited us. We can keep it running at very low cost. So we'd like to keep it running for now and continue to explore, and perhaps some new DNS protocols and features will be designed, and if people want to test it, we could do that, for example. There's one concern, and that is what if people actually start using it? We don't have a fancy IP address like 88888 or something, or 11111. So yeah, people better not start putting it in their firmware or something. Otherwise, we have a problem, and certainly they have a problem. And we are thinking of turning it perhaps into some sort of service, but not for the whole public, but maybe for certain user groups in the Netherlands, perhaps, like maybe some institutions or schools or something. But that's in the preliminary stage, and we haven't decided anything on that just yet. Summarizing, it's no news, I suppose, for this group that modern resolvers are complicated, but I still would like to emphasize it because, like I said in the beginning, we see a technology gap between ISPs, even big ISPs like mine in the Netherlands, and big tech who are able to support all these nice features, and the ISPs who are not supporting them or can't support them or don't want to support them. I don't really know. So the question is, should we do something? Should we raise more awareness? I know there are already a few initiatives like KinDNS and the RIPE DNS resolver recommendations document, and also RFC 9832, but perhaps we should do more, I don't know. Should we publish cookbooks or blueprints, or should we just don't care? That's also an option. And with that, I'd like to thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Marco. Really interesting. There's some comments in the chat which I'll come on to in a second. I'm guessing a few people working for ISPs would be very envious of your architecture if they're doing legacy sort of DNS systems, which are less easy to in terms of the architecture.
Okay.
So is that someone trying to come in? Or is that just someone not
Dude, you're sending me an offer, right?
Somebody's not muted, I guess.
Right, they are now. That happens. So okay, well, that was really interesting. And you might want to catch the session at the OARC meeting on Thursday afternoon in Atlanta about sort of best practice. I think there's a general discussion about best practice and what are the right things to follow. So I think Phil is planning to try and just start a discussion within the community to sort of crowdsource what people think are the right things to follow. I'm addressing the point on one of your last slides there. So that might be informative. Obviously, I'm second guessing whether that leaves something useful. But in the meantime, there are some comments in the chat, and by all means, people, as I call them out, if you want to join the discussion, please do. But Andreas has pointed you to a blog post.
Yeah, I see.
At OpenSSL, and support for post-quantum in DOQ, so that might be useful. And David, who I know has already supported, I think both David DDR and DNR, I believe.
Yes. Correct.
So you'll see he's commented on needing to include the IP.
So David, the IP in the Sun is definitely a requirement to get DDR working?
Yes. What's interesting is that in the iOS beta version that we originally developed it for, it was not validating the IP in the SAN, which was exciting for us because our product usage is usually on the inside on a private class IP. So, but then when the final version came out, and Apple's official documentation now does require the IP to be listed in the SAN. So
Right.
if that does not validate, then it just drops
Right.
I'm hoping that they're going to see the value in not making that a requirement, which I think technically is listed as the opportunistic behavior. I'm hoping that they'll support opportunistic in the future because, as far as I'm concerned, it'd still be better to offer it than to drop back to plain text.
Right. Yeah, because we found out it's pretty challenging to get a certificate with an IP address in it.
That is John Todd's complaint as well, Quad 9,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they have a hard time doing a provider that will do IPv4 and IPv6 and
Exactly.
a domain name, and that is the challenge.
Yes, and also
Now,
we have an Anycasted setup, so we need to
right.
have text records on all these DNS disks or simulated text records for validation. But that's the easy part.
Yeah.
But the hard part was to find the right CA that allows this.
There is only one. Last time I spoke with John, so you could just take a look who Quad 9 uses, and that's apparently the only one that supports it today.
Okay, I will have a look right after this session. Thanks.
John does pick up. Oh, he's on the mailing list for this, as are the likes of Tommy Pauly and Tommy Jensen, both of whom were authors of the DDR draft, and their counterparts for that matter on the DNR drafts. So hopefully they'll pick this up if they catch up with the recording.
Yeah.
So they can pick up on that. So yeah, I'm just scanning down the rest of the chat. So I think Patrick was confirming the point about let's encrypt. Vicky has got.
She's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. But in this case, I liked it, so I left the pictures in because it was spelling NSEC wrong and in all various ways, and it was kind of funny. So, but it's true. AI is terribly bad at the spelling.
Yeah, long may that continue, because if it starts to not make mistakes, then we've got problems.
We already got problems, I guess.
And finally, and then I'll come on to, I see Nigel's got a hand up. If I come to Nigel, David, you maybe, yeah, I think you probably covered this. You don't have too many protective resolvers yet. So that's a feature suggestion for you, I think.
Yeah, but I'm not exactly sure what David means by with a protective resolver. What should?
Oh, the term protective resolver is starting to become used much more in all of the CISA documentation, specifically as it relates to DNS resolvers being used by United States government agencies. So a protective resolver is one that does apply some kind of DNS-based threat intelligence. So that if a domain is known to be malicious, that it stops resolving, and whether it resolves with a block page or NX domain or whatever, that's up to the individual implementations. But the reason I was asking for this is because when you asked in your last slide, exploring other possibilities, we serve a smaller network so that they have an internal way of doing DNS harmony, and DNS harmony is our way of saying, let's in real time check this FQDN against all kinds of threat intelligence sources. And so that was my comment about we don't have too many. So would you consider doing that too?
Yeah, we thought about it, and we have RPZ in place, so that would be one way of doing it, but we would do it on a separate IP address, I guess, just like Quad 9 does it.
Right. And what seems to be the standard is that almost everybody who does it, where it's available to any public inbound query, is there tends to usually be 3. Clean Browsing does 3, Cloudflare does 3, Quad 9 just has the one size fits all, right? Which matches their mission. But yeah, if you did 3, I realize that you end up needing more IP addresses. So anyway, just thought I'd leave that with you. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for that, David. So, right, let's rattle through the raised virtual hand. So, Nigel first, if you want to unmute.
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon. Yeah, just very quickly, this really interesting, and it's really good to see a sort of non-platform-based resolver sort of there. I just wondered whether, I mean, you mentioned the DNS for EU. that what was happening there. I don't think anything's launched yet there, but if it did, it was going to no doubt there would be a lot of commission pressure for those in Europe to use that. But presumably what you're doing is completely open to everyone, so it has more applicability.
Yes, well, there's no denying that we were inspired by doing this when that EU initiative took place, or the call for tender. And we were thought, okay, what kind of resolver is this going to be? You're right, we're still waiting. I want to test it, but I guess I have to be a little bit more patient just now. But it is announced for this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, good.
But we were very curious. What will it be? Will it have filtering? What happens from a legal perspective? We haven't touched that topic, which is an interesting topic all by itself already. But yeah, we have to wait, and that's why we called it DNS for all, because we said, okay, this is going to be a blueprint kind of thing, and perhaps we don't even need DNS for EU. And if you do it like this or something similar, every ISP could do it. It's no rocket science. But yeah, let's wait and see. That's an interesting development, and there's a lot of money available apparently to build it.
Good, thank you.
And you're right, but I think DNS for All's public resolver is due to launch this year.
DNS for EU.
Sorry, indeed. Yes, I'm doing it as well. Sorry, Dave. I guess you have the advantage, though, that by positioning yours as experimental, then it gives you the ability to easily test things. Whereas if yours was a full production version, and I don't mean that in a bad way, then that might put more constraints on you. But
that's absolutely true. I am hiding behind the fact that I can say it's an experimental resolver, because running a resolver is quite a responsibility. If you do it, you have to do it right. There is no way of half doing it, I guess.
Yeah.
There's a nice example of that, the OpenDNS case in France, when they withdrew after they lost that lawsuit. Suddenly people couldn't turn on their lights again, because apparently Philips Hue enabled OpenDNS in their firmware.
Wow, okay. That's not so good. Right, let's keep an eye on the time. So Peter, do you want to jump in? Peter, you've disappeared. Has Peter left the call?
God,
there you are.
How many years have we been using Zoom, and I still forget to unmute myself? Thank you, Marco. That was really interesting presentation. It's really good to hear about DNS for all.eu. Why did you choose .eu as the?
It's too mean. We shouldn't have done it. I'm sorry.
I'd like if you could list I know Andrew's going to send over the slides to us, but if you could list those features that you had on that one slide on the website, that would be great, because I would love to.
Yeah, the slides will be on their way. Andrew will send them, I'm sure.
But the one slide you had with the list of features, if you could put it on the DNS for all website, I think it would be really interesting.
Oh yeah, we could do that. Yes.
Yeah,
that's a good suggestion.
I'm curious about how many res info queries that you're getting. Like, are people actually using it in the wild? Is it,
No, we received basically 2. Well, maybe a little bit more, but really very few. The one was from the OpenBSD guys, and the other one was from somebody building a Perl tool that looked at res info, and he also noticed that we were doing it wrong. And if you look at the GitHub repository of Unbound, you'll see that I have an issue there, and he commented on that issue. So that's the good part, that actually people were using it, but it's really, really very few. And I'm not even sure how useful that RFC is going to be, but time will tell, I guess.
I think it's got promise. I think it's the kind of thing where if people start using it for metadata about a resolver, then, it can be.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. In fact, Stefan and I made some proposals for adding more records, or are they called records anyway? I don't know. But fields would be a proper name. Yeah.
And the last thing, so you were asking about HTTPS queries that you're getting. A couple of years ago, when I was in a position to look at this kind of information, I checked this as well, and I saw tons of these queries.
Yeah.
And I think my conclusion, I didn't quite understand it completely, but at the time, my conclusion was it was mostly Apple devices which were trying to do DDR. So
Oh,
they were
really?
trying to, yeah, because service binding and HTTPS are sort of the same thing. They're, it's type 64 and 65. So I think at one point when SVCB wasn't as commonly used, like HTTPS was introduced first or something like that, and it was that's why a lot of the queries came through. That was my
My impression was that this draft can save you a few extra queries if you directly know what to do, like go the ALPN thing, go to
yeah.
H33, and also the IPv4 hints and IPv6 hints can save you perhaps an additional A query or something. But I'm not entirely sure myself.
But so yeah, I think they probably should be service binding queries, but they're actually HTTPS ones instead.
Yeah.
But that's a very hesitant answer. So if anybody knows anything different, then I'm happy to be corrected. Yeah, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Pete. Philippe, did you want to unmute?
Thanks, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. Marco, you probably said that at the very beginning of the presentation. My apologies, but this being experimental, who are the users of this? What are the clients? The reason why I'm asking this is that, so as a disclaimer, I work for Orange. I'm based in Normandy, France. When you mention Charles de Gaulle and you're being in the Netherlands, I initially thought about Dutch travelers flying through Charles de Gaulle because they had an Air France KLM ticket. That's
No.
the first thing you think about. But so coming back to my initial question, who are the users of this?
It's a fair question. First of all, there aren't supposed to be any users other than us because our office is hooked up on DNS for all. But of course, we published about it, so there are other users as well, which is fine. And the people know what they're doing because they read about it and they configure it and they want to play with it, which is perfectly fine. But the Charles de Gaulle thing, so the Paris node thing, is something else. We saw that happening after the OpenDNS lawsuit, where OpenDNS lost that lawsuit, and then they withdraw from the French market. And we saw at that point some organization, or maybe a couple of organizations, making the switch to us. And because these are French clients, so that they're not Dutch travelers going over to Charles de Gaulle, they are just French clients somewhere. And BGP brings them to our Paris node. That's why we see them ending up in Paris. And we call that the Charles de Gaulle node because we use airport names for locations. But it's French users. That's all I can tell. I don't know who or what company.
That's interesting.
And it's just a few, but it's still enough for 400 queries per second, which is much more than I expected when I started this.
It's not a total. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Philippe. And then last, so we'll close the mic queue after this. So Andreas, the last point to you then, please.
Hey, first of all, I was one of your few users, by the way, because I caught by your blog post about PQC some weeks back and started to look into this because interesting topic. And I'm wondering if you found any other client in Google Chrome supporting DOH over PQC ciphers yet, because for me that's the only client I could find that can make use of it as of today. Did you spot anything different?
I haven't. No, I only use Google Chrome to check if it's working. So no, I don't know if there's any other client using it, to be frank. I know that there are other DOH servers supporting it, like I believe Cloudflare has it, obviously. But about clients, I wouldn't know. No, sorry. But if you learn anything, I'd be interested to know that as well on my end.
Okay, let you know.
So maybe a question for anyone watching the recording. If you're aware of any others, please just pop me a message and we can sort of share with Marco and well, others. I'll just add it to the in the link to the recording for reference. Brilliant. Well, look, I'm mindful of time. That was really interesting, Marco. Thank you.
Thank you.
For that, and as I say, I think there'll be architecture envy from all the people battling with legacy DNS systems who would love to have the clean simplicity of your approach. But there's no ROI in investing in replacement of legacy systems, sadly. But anyway, thank you for that. Seriously, I think it was a really good presentation, and I think that will spark some sort of post-call discussions. Right, I'm just going to briefly change gear. Marco, you're of course welcome to stay or disappear as your diary permits. But
no, I'll stay if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me reshare my screen in just a moment. For some reason my PC is objecting to me sharing. I hope it will let me. Seems to have frozen again. That's a joy. Okay, I will talk. If it lets me at least look at the slides I thought I was going to share. Let's try that. Oh, no, it's woken up. All right, that's, thank goodness for that. Right. Okay, so I'll just to recap. Right, so just briefly, some of the headlines from the week, which those of you that get the weekly headlines email would have seen. I'm not going to go through all of these because there were an awful lot this week, but I'll just highlight some for you to have a look at. One at the top of the screen first, I was intrigued to see that there's at least tentative steps in the US to putting forward some proposals for a law requiring ISPs to block access to rights infringing sites, but only if that's backed by a court order from the copyright owners. So I know that's already something which is in legislation in a number of other countries. In fact, according to the article, I think there's already 55 countries that have something like that. It's early days for the US, but I think it's interesting that that's even a discussion that's starting, because with the sort of normal approach to legislation in the US, that wouldn't have normally been a topic of conversation. So I'm just interested that that's even come up. So just mention that for those of you who have with a policy interest. Also, and we don't have time to talk about today, but in terms of blockchain connected naming schemes, D3 Global have announced they've raised money to, in their words, modernise internet domain names. What that actually got, amongst other things, is they've announced a new protocol that they claim, I've not sort of checked this, is compliant with ICANN's requirements, and so can bridge the sort of Web 2 and Web 3 sort of naming systems. So you can handle problems like name collisions or avoid problems like name collisions and so on. And there's quite a lot of backers, many of whom are already involved in blockchain linked naming systems. So it's going to be interesting to see how that develops in terms of the sort of basic infrastructure. There's well, to me, a really interesting piece at the bottom of the screen there. Black Hat Europe, Cisco published quite a longish article on the sort of summarising the infrastructure that was put in place for Black Hat Europe. Talked about various things, including some of the DNS protocols that they observed on the network and how they handled oblivious DOE when they spotted that sort of present on the network. What steps they put in place to ensure security of the network, given that some of the people at Black Hat Europe might be quite adventurous in their approach to things. So more stuff on RDAP and Whois. We've touched on that earlier, I think last month. So there's a reasonable profile of people talking about the sunsetting of Whois, although as this article confirms, they're expecting quite a long tail before it eventually disappears. But certainly I know ICANN seem to be pushing in that general direction. Forgive me, maybe we'll come back to this next week, but we don't have time. David Ridicop, who's on this call, put a piece out on the back of an article by Brian Krebs on infrastructure laundering and how zero trust sort of approaches to DNS can help prevent that from succeeding. And I'm grossly summarizing what he said, but that's a good read. And also Domain Tools, the one at the bottom of the next screen, published, I've restarted, I think, a monthly newsletter as well as putting out a weekly reading list. And if Joe's still on the call, it'd be good to get your colleague perhaps to come onto this call just to talk about either or both of those, because it's good to see that's happening, sort of backed by the sort of intellectual expertise of the domain tools team. So maybe we could get them. I can't remember your colleague's name off the top of my head, but I thought that was so Daniel. It's in the URL, of course. Daniel. It'd be good to get perhaps Daniel on if he's interested.
I can see what his schedule looks like.
Fantastic, thank you, Joe. And then just on more general stuff, a reminder that the DSA transparency reporting deadlines are fast approaching. So for very large platforms, you've already had to produce reports, but for I think medium-sized platforms, the deadline's approaching where it'll be the first deadline to produce a report, and quite a few organisations on this call I think would be caught by the DSA, and if they had not classified as sort of very large platforms, they'll certainly be caught by this one. So I just wanted to mention that as well. And then just finally, just to go out back, got time to briefly touch on this, Peter. Network level ad blockers. Interesting post about that as maybe a trend, and that might have a much greater impact than device level ad blockers. But Peter, I don't know if you wanted to jump in and make a brief comment about that. And if so,
so before the meeting had properly started, I claimed that the company that posted this, well, this is the CEO called AdShield, was owned by IO. But I was actually wrong. I double checked myself. And they're not owned by IO, but they have the same business model, which is basically they want to get ads through to people who are blocking ads. It's called like ad recovery or something like that. So,
thank you. So, sorry, go. I've knocked my mouse, which is irritating. So sorry about suddenly. Right. So anyway, there's lots of other stuff. As I say, bumper week for news this week. So plenty of other things, but time doesn't permit us to cover those. So there's a few deadlines coming up this week, apart from some job ads. You'll see if you want to do a lightning talk at OARC later on this week, you got to the end of Thursday to put your proposal in. Also, if you there's a call for contributions from Echo for a publication. Deadline for that is Friday. And also, for those of us that would qualify for Youth Dig, again, we got up until Friday to apply for that if you want to participate in Youth Dig. And then things continue into next week, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. But those are the most immediate ones. And then there's a whole bunch of other things which we don't have time for, but also this is a busy month for a whole range of conferences. As you can see, even this week, there's a DANOG from today through Wednesday, IGF Open Consultation and MAG meeting from Wednesday through Friday, etc. So there's a whole lot of different things. Or I should say the Beyond Who Is one as well. On Thursday looks quite interesting if you're not involved in the OARC meeting, which itself is on Thursday and Friday. So lots of stuff, and that the sort of pace continues, as you can see, through the rest of February as well. So that's probably it. Next week, we'll just do a quick roundup with some of the interesting things that came up at the OARC meeting. And then the week after, we got Trust Checker and related topics. So a couple of the team from the DNS Research Federation will be joining us. And I perhaps, Joe, when you're checking schedules, I was thinking about maybe the 24th Feb. If that happened to work, that would be a good opportunity to talk about the sort of the monthly sort of newsletter.
I'll go ahead and mention that as a candidate date.
Perfect. Thank you for that. but that's pretty much it from me. We've just got a few seconds. If I stop sharing my screen, if anyone's got anything else that you wanted to briefly comment on, or anything else that was on your mind, now's a moment where you can do that. And I can see, sorry, because my PC was playing up, the sort of chat dropped off my screen, but I can see a few useful things in the chat as well, such as the sunsetting of who is, etc. So thanks for those as well, everyone. Okay, well, if there's nothing else and no one else has jumped in, so I'm guessing not, I hope that was useful. We're bang on the hour. Thank you again, Marco, for a really good presentation. I hope that sparked a lot of even more interest in DNS for all, not to be confused with any other similarly named projects. I nearly went there, but luckily didn't, which would be unfortunate. And so thank you for that. Thank you everyone else for your time, and any of you that are in Atlanta, look forward to see you from Wednesday onwards. Always good to have a chat over a coffee or even a beer, ideally a beer if time permits. So other than that, see you in Atlanta or see you the same time next week. Have a great week, everyone. Bye all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye all.